Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to welcome you all to our first general meeting of 2026. And I hope that you have all had a good holiday, and I wish you all the best for this year. So first, I would like to take this time to acknowledge that UBC campuses are located on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Syilx Okanagan Nation and their people. UBC is a community of learners, and we have much to learn from Indigenous stewards. Just a note before we start our business meeting. I just want to share with you that we have many people joining us online today. So this is a webinar format, so everyone will be kept on mute. After the presentation, there'll be a question and answer period with Dr. Jakobi, and you will be welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'll read out the questions for Dr. Jakobi, and hopefully we can get to as many questions as possible. So now into our short business meeting. There are a few deadlines that I would like to mention. First, the deadline for the Emeritus College Annual Awards is February 25th, 2026. I encourage you to consider nominating a colleague for the 2026 Emeritus College Awards. These awards celebrate the remarkable contributions of our emeriti community. I hope you'll take a moment to think of someone deserving of such recognition, and more information is available on our website. Please note that the UBC Okanagan Emeriti are not eligible at this date, but we are actively working to change this going forward. The applications for subsidies for scholarly activities for 25-26 academic year will open mid-February. These subsidies support activities taking place between January 1st, 2025 and June 30th, 2026. Full details and the online application form can be found on our website. Next is the newsletter submission. The deadline to submit contents for the newsletter is January 23rd, 2026, and we really want to hear from you. So if there is something that you would like to share, please send it to the newsletter committee. And we are working on an ongoing story feature to be used in our upcoming communications, which is, what does the Emeritus College mean to you? If you're interested in sharing your story, please reach out to our communication coordinator, Heather Calder. I really would like you to consider this. This is very valuable. Also, I'd like to bring to your attention a few upcoming events in the college. Wednesday, February 4th, we are having a Philosopher's Cafe. Interesting topic in today's world. What kind of Canada do you want for 2026? I'm sure it will be a very interesting session. Thursday, February 12th, there will be a Green College lecture with Michael Gold from UBC Microbiology and Immunology. And on Thursday, March 5th, we are having our next general meeting, and it is a special film screening of All My Relations, with a discussion after with members of the Climate and Culture Emergency Cohort. I attended this film screening, and it is certainly excellent and very worthwhile. So I hope that I see many of you there, if not all of you. More information and registration can be found on our website for all these events. So next, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jennifer Jakobi. Dr. Jennifer Jakobi is a professor in health and exercise sciences at UBC Okanagan, serving also as the NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering for BC and Yukon. It's representing BC and Yukon. I want to get that right. And Director of the Healthy Exercise and Aging Lab, HEAL. With a research focus on neuromuscular and exercise physiology, she investigates age and sex-related changes in motor unit recruitment, reflex feedback, and muscle tendon adaptations, aiming to develop pre-rehabilitation strategies that help older adults maintain independence. Committed to equity in STEM, Dr. Jakobi founded the integrated STEM team, Advancing Networks of Diversity, and was associate chair of W West from 2018 to 2020, facilitating mentorship and inclusion-focused outreach programs. Dr. Jakobi is an avid outdoor enthusiast, a runner, triathlete, cyclist. She's dedicated to translating research into real-world impact for healthy aging. Dr. Jakobi.
Thanks, Sandra. I really appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go about sharing my slides, and hopefully all goes well here. So can everyone see those slides okay? Sandra, if you can give me a nod.
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Yes, perfect.
And I'm going to work on the assumption that my sound is okay, and we're going to get underway. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with everyone here today. It really is a privilege to interact with all individuals that really are committed to learning about and advancing healthy choices with aging. So I do want to acknowledge that the data I'm going to share with you today and the research that's been undertaken was conducted on the unceded and the ancestral territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. I encourage everyone to learn a little bit about the territories and the lands and the stewards that work those lands on our behalf, wherever you might be joining us from today. All right, it is giving me a hard time, so I'm going to take the laser pointer off and see if it works any better. There we go. So I hope you can see my pointer, but it seems like the laser pointer won't be functioning today. So with academic presentations and research presentations, I try to start with a disclaimer to place some context around the material I'm going to be sharing today. So my disclaimer is not with respect to a company. My disclaimer, my conflict of interest is I have a personal self-interest. I want to grow old, and I have an ulterior motive within the research that I conduct. I do not want to do it alone. So I place these front and center to disclose a bias, a personal bias that I have, but I think also a passion that it demonstrates for the research that I undertake. Before I go too far along, I would like to acknowledge the research participants that have undertaken these various studies, the partners that work alongside us, and the students that really enable me to do what I do because they do the hard work. I'd like to thank the funding agencies, NSERC, Michael Smith, CIHR, and also UBCO. And I want to convey my approach to this presentation. It's approachable, it's relevant, it's for a broad audience. Now, if it's a bit high level, I hope what it does is spark curiosity about neuromuscular mechanisms and insight into physiology that we can dive into in some more detail at the Q&A. So what I'm going to share with you today is the two aspects of my research program. I want to give you a little bit about background, aging in Canada, and then when I talk about the community-based aspect, where we really look to understand what aging in place means to older adults. I'm going to talk about a survey that we conducted nationwide and what it means relative to choice to age in place. Then I'm going to talk about some sex-specific differences and how we can go about living with functional independence to make the choices that I'll speak about in the early part of my talk, and gather those with respect to physical activity and the benefits for independence through resistance training. I will speak briefly about other forms of exercise, but the primary focus will be resistance training, and then I'm going to conclude. This slide's a little bit old, but I really love it because if you look out towards the dark line here, and I'm not certain if you can see the white pointer, the laser works better, but there's a dark line that centers around the year 2016. And if you look at the intersection between the red and the green lines, this point was unprecedented in the history of the world. It's the time point when the number of older adults, those 65 and older, exceeded the number of children 0 to 14 years of age. And that's an immediate turning point. How we focused on our health, how we focused on our family, and the various environments that we lived in immediately flipped from two ends of the spectrum. Another way to look at this in Canada is what's happening across the country. Well, it's not just here in BC. Across the country, we're seeing a doubling of the number of older adults. But what's really intriguing is that doubling is not really happening fully from the 65 and plus age category. It's really focused on those 75 plus years of age. So we've got a growth of the oldest old, if you will, with respect to our adult population, our older adult population. This is projected out over the next 20 years. This particular graph showing you the age in the central y-axis and population in the thousands on the x-axis, with males on your left and females on your right if you're looking at a screen. You will see the dark shaded in area of blue represents the population in 2020. If you look at the line that extends out to the side on both graphs, whether it be the male or the female, this is the projected population out towards 2041. What's truly intriguing, and if you spend any time at Shoppers Drug Mart on Seniors Day or walking down the streets, this won't be a surprise, but the data now provides some evidence that if you look at those 85 plus, whether we look at the year 2020 at the males being slightly under 10,000 population per million, or the females over here, much greater, closer to 10,000, now project out to 2041. See where these females are really approaching and exceeding 30,000. And if you go on the opposite side over here to males, they're not reaching yet 20,000. So the proportion of older adults is not only increasing in the 75 plus year category, but it's truly increasing more on the female compared to the male population side. And this shows us some unique opportunities to look at aging, the choices we make as older adults, and as we approach older adulthood, as well as what we do about aging as a society, because it's not the same for males and females. So what we sought to understand in Canada a few years ago, because we had a little bit of data from Europe and a teeny bit from the south of the border, was what aging in place means for Canadians. Now, living and aging in place is really twofold. The first thing we need to look at is what it means to live in a place, any place. And then second to that, and most important, how a place should accommodate one's aging processes. So when we started to dive deep into this, what we really wanted to focus on was the primary aspect of aging well. And what we heard from participants, gonna give you the trailer of the story here, as well as what we knew from the literature, is it's centered somehow around choice. And that choice also centered around remaining safely and comfortably in one's home, regardless of age. So this is what we knew from the literature. But what we really needed to understand was, is this what Canadians wanted? We didn't know this at the time. So we sought to gain a national perspective, as I've already said. And our approach for this survey was we partnered with a few different societies, one being the National Association of Federal Retirees, and conducted some surveys in both French and English, as well as some focus groups that were informed by the surveys. Now, the focus group centered on primary questions that arose from the 19-question survey. And those primary questions centered around, what does aging in place and aging with choice mean to you? What is your preferred housing and why? And what kind of supports for aging in place are important for you and why? Now, who responded to the survey was a very similar proportion of females and males. Most of them were in the 70 to 79 year old age category. Most were married or common law and white. So the first thing I need to identify is a limitation with this survey in that we don't have a very diverse perspective. And to account for this, we've undertaken additional surveys in partner with some Indigenous communities, as well as a few different Indigenous organizations across Canada to increase our Indigenous aspect. And those results are coming through right now. And we're still working on the immigrant population. It's a little bit lower. So take this into mind as you're hearing what the respondents told us about. Well, the first thing that we heard is they've heard of the term aging in place. About 350 of the 490 respondents said, yeah, they'd heard of it. Doesn't mean whether they all agreed on what it meant, but they'd heard of the term. For us, which was also interesting, is this survey was conducted about a year after the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we asked if that pandemic changed their perspective. And it was a resounding no. So the information that we heard after the pandemic, we would have also heard prior to the pandemic. So this informed us about older adults and how they weren't really changing in their perspective of aging in place or choice. But if you reflect back to the media and what we were hearing around that time and seeing, frankly, didn't match with what older adults had said and felt prior to the pandemic. All of a sudden now we were listening in a different manner. Now, what were we listening and hearing? Well, the results of the survey and the focus group really centered on 5 areas. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time going into each one of these areas. I'm going to give you a high-level perspective of what we heard from Canadians. So the 5 level areas are centered around within the triangle. The outside is funding, and I'll speak to that last. Within the triangle are these 3 overlapping circles, which speak to the built environment, communication and information, then social environment. And if you look at the center, all 3 of these circles overlap with a common statement, aging with choice. So it didn't matter what aspect we heard from the participants, everything reflected back to choice. So within the built environment, yes, it's things that we build. It's the engineered aspect of our society, but it is also the services that we provide to older adults that fit within this built environment. And what we heard clearly from older adults was that they believe we need to establish better access to services. One older adult said, "My concern is the supports haven't been there, and I'm not sure that they'll be there in the future." So these little quotes that are floating around actually are direct statements from the older adults in the focus groups. Now, when we looked at the second area, which was communication and information, it will be no surprise that there was an influence of COVID-19, but it was deeper than that, and it reflected back to prior to the pandemic. There is an increase in, as we're all gathered here today, technology, the use of technology, the access of technology, and the need for technology. And this was communicated in a statement where there's also the issue of the internet. For example, my doctor, you have to book your appointments online. And we hear this a lot in our current research where we're looking at the digital divide between older and younger adults. And access to the internet is not equal across this country. Is that in order to book an appointment, whether it be with your doctor or at the gym, or even during the pandemic, get your groceries, everything's centered around the internet. And for some people, it's a very scary place. And even if they choose to engage with it, they can't always use it. And there's a fear associated with it. So this is an ongoing area of research where we're looking at how we can better break down barriers and comfort to play in an online environment. The next area was the social environment. This is family, friends, and social inclusion. I'll speak to this a little bit later, but you'll be a little bit surprised as to the statements about family and friends. What was common, though, is the need for that interaction. So a comment like, "I would hate to be stuck in another area where we don't have our friends and we don't have all the medical staff we're comfortable with." So the social environment brings a level of comfort and engagement. But overall, it was very important that older adults are making the decisions before they're not able to make the decisions, and you don't have a choice anymore because of your physical limitations came out quite clear, sometimes cognitive as well. So what this really centered on was proactive decision making and what contributes to the ability of an older adult to make that proactive decision making. The outside area, which encompasses everything, is funding. Now, please note it wasn't personal finances. It was funding. This refers to the government system and the structures that are in place and the resources that are given to older adults to go forward and make the choices they want to make, the supports for them. And what we heard clearly was more supports in the home so that the choices they make can resonate within their own and preferred living environment. So this particular research was community-based, and we heard from those that participated about what they really wanted and the factors to remain independent within their choices for aging in place, ranked in this order. So the first one was family supports. Individuals wanted to be close to family, but they did not want to live with family, and that was quite clear. There was a need for social supports, a social network, and friends. Parallel and close to that was the built environment, and this is where they were closely coupled, and we see this within the research, that the built environment includes the social supports within it and the structures that enable you to live and navigate in the world that you choose to navigate in. The next one was physical supports that resounded around exercise programs, and this I'll speak to as I move forward in the slides. Next was cognitive supports. We actually expected this to be a little bit higher, and this is where we're talking about education programs and resources. And then the last one was connection with the natural environment. Living in BC and in the Okanagan, it surprised us a little bit, but please keep in mind we had a national survey, and the proportion of the survey was representative of the population of each province, pretty close. So this is where you can see probably a Canadian-wide perspective. So all of our results are summarized in our report. We have both an academic report, an academic publication, as well as a short report if you'd like to see this in full and dive down deep into the areas that I spoke of. So overall, what we learned was the key areas all center around making a choice and having choices. And that latter part is something that we as individuals and those that support the individuals, so government agencies and social supports, need to work together so that having the choice can occur. The challenge, as I've already identified, was capturing the voices of those that we missed. So what does choice mean? Well, for me as an exercise neuroscientist and looking at a lot of the elements that we saw within our research, at first I was a little bit, I'm going to say, disappointed that exercise didn't come to the top, or physical activity. But then when we started looking at it, and I looked at it more openly, I started to see a dimension of exercise that goes beyond longevity. It moves from prevention and disease into enhancing quality of life and maintaining functional independence. Now, before I go on and talk about resistance training, I like to show these two pictures of Helen and John from Etta Clark's Growing Old is Not for Sissies. It's a beautiful photographic book of aging. And I often get questioned, but I don't want big muscles, or I don't want, or I'm afraid of. These are two extremes. But what these individuals are showing us is that what we do on a day-to-day basis actually involves these crazy things called weights and these positions that we don't think we can put ourselves into. If we take a moment and step back, we're actually putting ourselves into resistance training positions on a day-to-day basis. And I'm going to explain that in a second, but the importance of it is demonstrated in this slide here. On the y-axis is age, and on the x-axis is muscle mass and strength. So basically that's how big you are and how strong you are from a muscle level. We know that that level of strength increases in our early life. And then it's either maintained or there's this slow descent in our adult life. And then as we progress into older life, the slope can be quite steep or it can be rather shallow. What the peach or brown, depending upon your screen pigmentation area on the bottom shows us, is a disability threshold. That means when our muscle strength, for example, in the bottom line, crosses this threshold, you can no longer be functionally independent. So what our goal is to not only get to a higher level, and for most of us, we have surpassed that peak in our midlife. So then what the goal becomes is to maintain that level. So the slide or the slope of the curve is much gentler or shallower. And then you can see that the range of muscle mass and strength individuals is quite broad. So what we're really trying to do with resistance training is make a shallower slope so that we can stay out of this peach or brown area. And then what we also need to identify and be really cognizant of that there is nothing wrong with assistive aids. We can call them environmental changes that can lower your disability threshold. So that's a really fancy way of saying it's okay to use a rollator. It's great to use a cane, probably not carry it around in your hands unless you're looking at elbow flexion training. But there's various different gait aids that can enhance our safety, because the one thing that we don't want to do and that I don't have time to discuss today is falls. And that's where these environmental factors can really minimize the fall risk and maximize your ability to maintain functional independence through resistance training. And why is this important? Going back to the aspect of males and females. On this particular graph, which is a collection of data from a systematic review that we did a few years back, and the circles, the filled in circles, are showing you the males, and the open circles are showing you the females from all the data on resistance training studies that at the time compared males and females. The first thing that's obvious, whether you look at your isometric strength, which means you're producing a force without changing the joint angle or shortening or lengthening the muscle. So for example, if I was to hold, and I hope you can see it on the screen, my arm in front of me rather, and put my other hand in front of it, and you can try this. Push your top hand down and lift up your bottom hand and like try to lift to the sky. If you are not moving, you're stable, that's called an isometric contraction. Another way of thinking of an isometric contraction is pushing a resistance that you can't move. So trying to push the wall down, you won't succeed. That's isometric in every single joint. The key thing here, comparing it to the other side, is when we look at isokinetic, that joint has movement, and it has movement at a fast or a slow rate. In both cases, males are stronger than females, so the filled dots in the solid line are above the dashed line and the open circles. But what's really key to look at is the right-hand side. We're at about the age of 42 or 43, in and abouts there on our modeling. You can see this abrupt decline. That's the breaking point. That's the statistical breaking point where females abruptly lose strength. Go further to the right. Males, yes, of course, they're higher and stronger. But what's really important is that breaking point doesn't occur till right around 70 years of age. It's a 30-year difference. So it tells us that females have this drastic decline in strength earlier, even though the slope is slightly shallower. It tells us two things. Females need to start resistance training early, but it's never too late. And keep that resistance training up so you can maintain that slope of the line. Guys have a little bit more forgiveness to start a little bit later. But if they don't start, they have a much greater decline in strength. And this abrupt change contributes in part to the differences in life expectancy alongside comorbidities. But there's this massive change in strength, which limits functional ability and creates disability, which then often results in falls, and falls are not a good thing. So let's talk about fitness. And I said I'm going to focus on strength or resistance training, which is this little corner over here. I want to identify the other components, even though I'm not going to talk about them. Balance, I'm going to speak briefly to. Flexibility, I won't touch. And endurance, I won't really touch as well, but I do want to acknowledge they're important to create a well-rounded physical activity program. But for me, both in my research, and I'll admit to being an endurance junkie, I like running. I'm currently on sabbatical in Italy, got lost this morning and I had a beautiful 11K run, but I didn't get my strength training in. So we all have to make sacrifices for joy, but also for life and longevity. And that's where I got my strength training in this afternoon. So you have to create a balance. So what about strength training? What about resistance training? Well, first off, I want to identify there's some crazy things going on in this slide. You've got these two women lifting these big circular weights. I would love to know who threw, and I think the woman on the left is trying to catch. Does she catch this massive medicine ball? And why would we ever go about using this type of equipment? Well, I'm going to explain that in a second. But first, I'm going to talk about frequency, intensity, time, and type. These are the FIT principles. We often talk about them with endurance exercise, but they apply to resistance training as well. So the key things with resistance training is they need to be functional exercises to create the most benefit for older adults. They need to be challenging enough to strengthen your muscle and bone. And it doesn't matter if they're weight machines, free weights, resistance bands, or your own body weight. You can create a program or activities that enable you to increase your strength, which will change the slope of that line or slow its decline and maintain functional independence longer. And I'm going to prove that to you with one of our research studies. So first off, let's talk about those components. Well, the first thing is 2 times per week is a minimum. And that 2 times per week for resistance training should be part of the 150 minutes of accumulated physical activity that is recommended by the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines for older adults. So it doesn't need to be above the 150 minutes. It's within it. You also need to train muscle power, which is a little bit more of a rapid muscle contraction. And the biggest thing to do is to progress. You're going to start with lighter weights, then you're going to lift heavier weights for less repetitions, and then you're going to start moving those weights if you want to the upper end, which is the power. So muscular endurance, when it says reps on the screens, means how many times are you going to do that particular exercise? If it's around 12 to 15 times that you're lifting whatever weight it is, you're focusing on muscular endurance, which is good. Then you want to increase the weight once you get familiar with the movements, drop the number of repetitions down to 6 to 8, and here's where you start building strength. After that, you can become more of a power person where you're moving the weights rapidly and only 2 to 3 times at a higher intensity. Volume is important, but I need to reiterate over and over again that low resistance training volume is going to improve your overall physical function. You're going to get a modest benefit in lean muscle mass and size. But if you really want to maintain functional independence, you need to maintain the strength that you have. And that means a higher training volume. That means you need to do it a little bit more, not once a week, definitely twice a week, maybe try to even go up to 3 times a week once in a while. This creates subtle differences between those that are aging, healthy, and well versus those that are aging with comorbidities. So volume is really important to build mass, and you need a higher stimulus from resistance training. What about intensity? It goes alongside volume. So if you have low intensity, you are not really going to get an effect on the neuromuscular system with respect to the muscle and muscle growth. You might get a little bit of change within your central processes, so the way you think and move. There's some learning that goes along. There's some changes in cortical activity, but there's really no change in muscle. And for this particular goal of maintaining functional independence, we need to maintain muscle. So we're going to increase strength and power by using a heavier load or a higher intensity. You need to feel it. Think about those days when in the spring you started gardening for the first time and it was a beautiful day and you spent the entire day outside and you know you worked. The next day you were a little bit sore. That's not bad. That's okay. And that's what you need to feel when you strength train. Similarly, you can gain the benefit with power training at a moderate velocity with a heavier resistance. These are really important because you want to grow that muscle mass. You want to stop the reduction in muscle mass that occurs naturally with aging. How do we know this works? Well, I'm going to share with you one particular study that we did in pre-frail older adults. It was a 12-week multi-component, high-intensity resistance training exercise. So I'm showing you those crazy weights again, this time in red and green in the lab. I'm showing you how this particular individual is doing basically a deadlift where they're lifting down and up with quite a bit of a load here. And then this pre-frail woman over here is doing a squatting exercise where she's holding a dumbbell. It's hard to see behind the star. And then she's squatting down into this kind of box, and then she's rising up again. This woman is using an inverted press, and she's pushing her legs out as opposed to squatting down, which also creates some back support. All these women were diagnosed or classified rather as pre-frail. None of them were classified as frail. If you look at these two circles from a review study we did, the biggest thing that differs between frailty and pre-frail is the amount of time that you exercise for. So pre-frail, 60-minute sessions, frail, 45-minute sessions. But the other big difference is this resistance training component. The light gray on your left circle, it's the top left quadrant. You can see your resistance training for 2 to 3 times a week at 80% of your maximum strength across all of your muscle groups. And it's going to take about 20 minutes. But when you think about it, 20 minutes twice, maybe 3 times a week, that's 40 to 60 minutes. That's not a lot to give to maintaining your muscle strength, improving your muscle strength to stay out of that peach-brown area of functional dependence. The reason pre-frail are a little bit lower in time is because they can't tolerate it. And the reason they're lower in resistance training is because the muscle mass and the level of weakness has declined to an extent where moving their body around aerobically or in a balance exercise is actually strength training. So the goal is to progress that pre-frail group, or the frail group rather, up to the pre-frail status. Now, when we did this study, there was some data to show that resistance training works for muscle strength and muscle mass. But nobody really looked at, can you take a pre-frail group of individuals, in this case women, and make them robust or non-frail? So these women in this 12-week program were divided randomly, pseudo-randomly, into a control group and an exercise group. These 4 different diagrams show you things that we had looked at a little bit across research studies, which is strength, whether it be isometric or isotonic, meaning without movement or with movement. And this refers to the muscles at the front of your legs, often called the thigh. And you can see the exercise group in both cases, whether it be no movement, isometric, or movement, isotonic, increase their muscle strength. The control group didn't change. Now, our control group didn't do nothing, if you can actually say that grammatically. They were involved in their regular activities. The reason I said pseudo-randomized is this was a 12-week program. Most people in Canada in the winter, if they're retired, don't stick around for 12 weeks. So it was pseudo-randomized in that we randomized them, and then if we knew they were leaving for an extended period of time, they were put in the control group. So they carried out their daily activities. Many of them were going south and walking, golfing, being active, but not involved in a high-intensity strength training program. What is really telling is these 2 graphs at the bottom tell us about their ability or their functional ability, which is a time to sit and stand from a chair and how fast you can walk. For time, I'm going to gather your attention to the right panel, and you can see from the black bars at baseline, relative to follow-up, they walked faster. And they walked faster from 5 weeks to follow-up as well. So they got faster in both their walking speed and their sit to stand time. These are predictors of functional ability. But what about frailty? This is what we're trying to change. We don't want people to be frail. We want them to be functionally independent. So these are our participants here. It was a small lab-based study that we have now translated into larger community programs. And this is two different ways to look at frailty. One is the frailty phenotype, and the other is gait speed. Your blue at the top in squares is your exercise group. If the arrow goes to the left, they became less frail. If the arrow goes to the right, they became more frail. Generally, you can see it doesn't matter how we measure it, and the order of the arrows stay the same for all participants. Those that were in the exercise group became less frail, and those that were in the control group, still going about regular activities, became more frail. This told us in 12 weeks, natural aging is causing a decline in ability, leading us towards that functional dependence. So even though we might be active, we need to do more. Resistance training works is what I would like to convey more than once. Volume is important to make a functional difference. But if you really want to increase strength, which will translate more to a functional benefit, you need to work harder at a higher intensity. You need to lift those weights. We also need to consider the frailty status or the ability of the individual, which comes to individualized programming a little bit. We certainly need to consider sex, and age as a factor, albeit less than sex. So I said I wasn't going to talk about the others, but a lot of people are resistant to resistance training. And a lot of people don't involve balance training in their typical daily activities. So I want to highlight one easy change that you can make, and that's balance training. And it's effective on the short term as well as the long term. It impacts daily activity and your mobility. And it really does improve lower limb strength if you do single leg balance training, because you're supporting your body weight on half of your typical bipedal stance, if you will. And the key thing with balance training is it doesn't take any time, and you can factor it into your daily life. And believe it or not, you probably use a similar element to factor into any young people's life that you might have raised. So most people brush their teeth at least once to twice a day or do their dishes. So just make balance a daily habit. When you go to brush your teeth, dry off your dishes, rinse out your coffee cup, take a moment, use the counter as a little bit of a balance platform for safety, and stand on one foot. If you find that easy, lift one hand up, then lift the other hand up. And if you can still maintain your balance on one foot, that's wonderful. But now go to your toes and see how long you can do that. Do both sides and then go back, stand on one leg, put your hands on the counter or something that's comfortable, safe, not movable, and close your eyes. Challenge your balance, challenge your vestibular system, and you will find great reward and tiny increases in strength because you're using your own body weight as a resistance. Now, it's really important for physical activity for the state of physical independence. I cannot reiterate that enough. But what we also need to understand and embrace is there's a benefit for mental health. So physical activity shows a vital role in shaping our overall well-being and our quality of life. That doesn't matter if you're doing it individually or if you're doing it in a group. However, there is greater benefit from physical, cognitive, and emotional health when you can join a group or create a group to exercise. So the physical benefits are clear with respect to reducing cardiovascular risk, diabetes, but let's focus on the social network. What does the social network do? Well, older adults that prioritize their physical well-being and engage in regular exercise and maintain healthy habits are those that are typically belonging to a social group. And when you belong to a social group, and this is one here, you're participating in one today, especially when you're in person, not as much online. But those social engagements and physical activity enhance cognitive function, memory retention, and they reduce the risk of cognitive decline. Think about those exercises that I showed you briefly on the screen. If any one of them might have confused you, put yourself in a class where now you have to learn them and do them. Don't be embarrassed to learn them and do them. You're challenging your cognitive function. And then when you come back next week, you're challenging your memory to see if you can actually think about what you did and do it again without relearning it. So there's so much to contribute to mental and cognitive benefits with respect to physical health. It also reduces depressive symptoms, increase emotional well-being. You find a purpose, a belonging, sometimes even emotional sense of stability, and you combat feelings of loneliness and isolation. It makes sense. You're with a group. Now, often when we think about group, we think about those of a similar age cohort, those joining today. Now, what about intergenerational learning? Well, in these particular interventions that I took the lab with these small groups of participants to the community, there is an enormous benefit for university students engaging with older adults. It is a bilateral relationship that the staff in various facilities appreciate, the older adults appreciate, and I can't tell you enough about how the university students, and in all honesty, overcome a fear of older adults in many cases. One of them said, I didn't think I could talk with them, but I like talking with them. Another said, I want to work with them, and I thought I wanted to work with kids. So there's so much to be said about this intergenerational learning. In the bottom panel, I'm showing you an example of a real extreme way to overcome the digital divide, which is virtual reality. So these older adults and university students participated in designing virtual reality. The older adults told the computer programmers what they wanted designed, and they went about designing what the older adults wanted, then evaluating it with the older adults' input, designing the survey, and these older adults are co-authors on the paper. So it's really great to create a social program across generations. This even applies to children and youth. I'm still showing you the university programs here, but also if you look here on the far left, you're seeing an intergenerational program where we're using little microbits and robots with kids and older adults to better experience technology. So overall, what I hope I've given you today is a perspective that aging in place has 5 key areas. All of those key areas are going to center around making your choice and having choices. And your choice doesn't mean someone else's choice, and sometimes it may not even mean your partner's choice. And that's an entirely separate conversation. But across choice and having choices, physical activity can be touched and be touched by all of these 5 areas. The challenge is change is hard. So do it together, because the reward with social integration couples everything. So I hope I've given you a little bit of a perspective on what choice means, on how difficult change can be, and potentially taking a chance to embrace it and see where it can go. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions, Sandra.
Yes, no, before we have questions, I want to thank you so much. This has been such a valuable talk in so many areas and has touched me personally in so many areas as I am aging, and so are my friends and family. And the areas you touched, firstly about aging in place, absolutely correct. Absolutely. Everything you said, making choices, your choices, and then deciding what is the best outcomes for those choices, and then physical exercise. The importance of exercise and how it's going to maintain us as we age healthily in place. So thank you so much for this talk. I'm now going to go to the Q&A and we will see about questions. First question that I have is, could you comment on the use of creatine?
Yep.
Creatins.
Yep.
Yes.
Creatine or
Yeah.
creatine.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I'm chuckling because my PhD thesis many years ago focused on creatine. So I'll start a little bit from that perspective. Creatine does create minor benefits to increasing muscle strength. I will caution you to ensure that, and it also has been shown recently to increase cognitive function. So the evidence is there. Creatine can and does work. The other challenge with creatine that we need to be careful of is it's really hard on our kidneys. And too much creatine in the system is not good, and we need to pump it out. So if you're thinking about using creatine, it's beneficial, but I'm going to encourage you to talk it over with your physician, get some baseline blood work done, and then start it and get some baseline blood work done after a little bit of time. It is not shown to be of high risk, but I do know, I'm going to say it's not scientific evidence, but it is my close friend who works in a lab, who herself has now gone off creatine because she has seen an increase in the creatinine scores of older adults using creatine. So there's a little bit of caution and more research that needs to be done, but the evidence is there at this current time that it is not risky. It needs to be monitored. It increases muscle mass and increases cognitive health or function.
Thank you. Next question is, could you comment on the use of yoga due to resistance to body weight?
I think yoga is a great form of exercise. It uses flexibility, balance, and strength because you're lifting your and moving your own body weight. And in certain instances, also using aids, whether they be the cushions or bands or various different things. Before I go any further, I just want to reiterate, though, it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're moving through a state of resistance. And that can be yoga. It can be strength training. It can be your own body. I'm just going to encourage you to garden. And I don't mean in a flower box. I mean garden, like heavy garden. Move your body with a state of resistance. So yoga is great for many. They're showing many different benefits for yoga, inclusive of Parkinson's disease.
And would you include Pilates in that, in
Yes.
resistance training as well?
Yeah.
Because that's become very popular now.
It is. And I'm also going to encourage people to make certain when you're doing these programs, some of them start off very quick. You don't have to do as quick as what the instructor is sometimes doing. You join a different program, and I train kinesiology students. Many of them are great and know exactly how to do adaptive exercises. Some of them are a little less aware of how older adults need to do things at a slightly slower pace to pick up the pace. So don't overdo the repetitions and the pace at the beginning, but absolutely join any class that you will keep going to. That's the key thing. Keep going.
Good point, for sure. Okay, next question. How do we know the amount of weight to use in weight training?
That's a good one. I would say feel it. You can use what we call perceived exertion. So when you lift something up, let's say it's that big jug of milk at the grocery store. What we notice with older adults is sometimes they start reducing that big jug of milk, even though they still drink it, but they don't want to carry it. So they then go to the grocery store twice. But a jug of milk, a big like those Costco laundry things, like those big detergent, they're heavy. If you are lifting that and you cannot lift it, that's too heavy and you need to go lighter. So to figure out how heavy something is, figure out what the maximum is you can lift and then back it off. Or think honestly to yourself, if I was to work on a scale of 0 to 10, this is about a 6 if I lift whatever it is 5 times. If I lift it 8 times, which I can do, it's an 8. I would say lift it 8 times, make it your 8, as long as it doesn't stop you from living your life the next day. It's a little bit different if you're, a young 25-year-old guy or girl who's at the gym trying to put on mass. If you are lifting so much that you can't live your life the next day, back it off is my advice. So direct answer is play around with the weight. Don't hurt yourself, and you should be exerting weights or movements that are about 7 to 8 in your threshold of intensity.
Good, thank you. Next question is, this person is 72 years old, a female, and started resistance training with UBC Kinesiology's Changing Aging program 2 years ago. The group experience has been exactly as you described, highly recommended, but did I start too late? I've been a runner since I was 25, but reluctant to do strength resistance training till now.
No, you did not start too late. Not at all. And congratulations, running. And if you're still running, it does bring you enormous joy. But you do need to now maybe increase that strength training instead of once or twice a week, maybe do it once on your own. What you want to do is maintain that muscle mass that you currently have. If you've been a lifelong runner, most lifelong runners typically have a more lean, narrower muscle. You want to start putting on some mass. And it's never too late. You can put on mass your entire life. It's aging. It's harder. You have a little bit less physiology working in your court. It's no different with running. You probably ran faster when you were 25. Well, you're going to have to lift a little bit longer and more to maintain that muscle mass, but it's never too late.
Good. Good to know. Thank you. Next, does a full Pilates program meet the main exercise objectives that you identify?
Good question. Every Pilates program is a little bit different. I would say generally, yes. The key one that may not, depending upon the program and depending upon the rate at which you move through the exercise, might be endurance, so your cardiovascular health. Most of them will meet all requirements, definitely strength, balance, and flexibility. Just make certain you're getting the cardiovascular benefit of it, or if not, go for a walk. Jump on a cycle bike, stationary, not stationary. Yeah, Pilates is quite good.
Good, good. Okay, next. While most of your suggested interventions are individually based and driven, as society morphs, there is no commensurate increase in facilitating engagement in exercise activities you suggested. Can you comment on what resources should be, in theory, in place for support of ever-increasing aging participation? Our healthcare system is notoriously deficient, sorry about that, in supporting the health of the aging population. And I concur with that. So I think that's a great question.
Can I just say yes? It is a great question.
Of course you could.
There's so many places to start. You're right. I would say generally from fitness professionals all the way through up to government, we are not providing the resources that older adults need to succeed. What I can say as a group here gathered, as a group, you can advocate for more. I would highly encourage you to reach out for this Seniors Advocate of BC, whose name is something Sexsmith, I think. I might be missing that up. I can find it for you because I'm drawing a blank. It's 11 o'clock in Europe.
It's okay. That's okay. No, that's
I will find it
though.
for you. But advocate for yourself. And then the other thing is, together as a group, you can create subgroups that can really then work together, and each of you find pieces of information. The bottom line is, yes, we need more to support older adults to age with the choices they want in the homes that they need and want. And our healthcare system is not living up to that. And for that, I will apologize, but we just got to work together and overcome it. Advocate for yourself. On a side note, whenever you go to the doctor, bring a friend, bring a partner, bring a child, because you need to gather the information, and two minds are better than one. So you might ask a question and someone else might spur another question. It's not a pile on of the physician, but it's really a group connection to support each other. If we can't support you, we have to support each other. I
Very
hope
good
that
point.
helps.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Okay, I'm on to the next. I have to scroll up here again. Is it wise to consult your physician to identify any kinds of exercise you should avoid or approach in moderation because of your particular body state?
It's never a bad idea to consult your physician. There is a general tendency for those that were trained in an older system to not as much appreciate the benefits of bringing in a kinesiologist or an exercise specialist. So I would definitely consult your physician, make certain you have no contraindications to exercise, heart conditions or things like that, that most of them you can exercise through, but there are a few that your physician might comment on. And then if you're able to, work with an exercise physiologist or a kinesiologist to just get you going and get you started. It doesn't mean you need a personal trainer. Especially if you're cautious and concerned, there's nothing wrong with calling in an expert. And there's places on UBC's campus, both Vancouver and the Okanagan campus, that have students gaining experiential learning that can actually work and advise on these types of activities. So consult your physician, but don't expect them, in most cases, to give you an exercise program. You will have to start doing that on your own or finding someone to give it to you.
Okay, and next I'm going to apologize to the next person because I skipped it and go back to her. Are there good sources to increase muscle strength exercises, or do you need a gym personal trainer to advise a personalized program?
They're always great. And they're definitely wonderful people to help you, but you don't necessarily need one. If you know that you have high blood pressure, let's say, and you're moderately overweight, we can groan, and maybe this group will have a session on AI. But I will be the first to admit I have played around with it, and I know other older adults who are a little bit savvy with the internet will open up your chat box, go into something like the Chat GPT or the Google AI system, program in who you are, and say, give an exercise program for a beginner, and you'll get a basic exercise program to start. Play around with it, moderate it, see what it does. Am I advocating for using AI? No. I'm advocating for playing around and understanding what it is. No different than you would as an individual trying to find resources, whether you're traveling, buying a home, looking for an investment banker, or learning about your medication. Use your resources. Those resources can be people. Those resources can be yourself with the internet. Those resources can also be books, Instagram, YouTube. There's various different ways to get information nowadays, including your physician.
Good, thank you. Okay, next is can practicing, and that's in quotations, balancing with your eyes closed improve this ability?
Your functional ability, yes, and it can actually improve your balance as well. So definitely, but I always encourage people to use it in a safe manner. So bathroom counters and kitchen counters are the perfect height for balance, and they're stable. They're not going to go anywhere on you. Where a lot of people will say, "Oh, I use the back of a chair." The backs of chairs do come out from under you. So try to pick something that's safe and stable. But yes, closing your eyes is a great way to increase your balance and work with your vestibular system.
Good. Okay, and we have a few people sharing information, and I should have remembered it as well. Dan
It's
Levitt
Dan Levitt.
is the
Thank
seniors
you.
advocate. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And there is a website, but I think that if you Google Dan Levitt, you'll find the website for him.
Yes.
Oh, and I have a phone number too, but I think that I'm going to leave that to people. Uh, I think that is the end of the many questions. Thank you so much. Certainly, I really, again, will reiterate on behalf of the Emeritus College, this has been such a valuable, valuable talk. I really, really enjoyed how you started about aging and aging in place and the choices about how and why and where we age in place. I'm sure that has touched many people who are in the audience. And then as well, how you explained resistance training and how what is important and how it is important. And really my takeaway is the most important part of this is to reduce falls, which is number one for those of us who are seniors, and also for us to maintain a very healthy lifestyle. So again, on behalf of the college, I want to thank you so much for your presentation today.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Take care.